Peglin, the absolutely incredible Peggle roguelike, is one of my most played roguelikes of all time. I have over 500 hours in the game, and I've made over 400 videos on my channel, and so many people come into my live streams asking for advice and help on how to beat the high Cruciballs. And as someone who has beaten Crucible 20 on every class many times, I thought it would be fun to make a guide of my personal advice on how to get better and beat all of the Cruciballs on every class. So I'm going to break this up in 4 sections. Firstly, the most general advice and the most important tips you need to know if you're struggling, then advice for every specific class, then we'll take a deep dive into every single Crucible level, and at the end, some tips for Act 4, because Act 4 is the new secret act you can unlock by getting a win with every class and choosing both challenge relics, but you don't need to beat Act 4 to level up Crucibles, so I'll try to only mention that part at the end. So just jumping right into some general advice for how to beat high Crucibles, the biggest thing is I always try to think of an imaginary checklist of things that you need in order to win at high Crucible as consistently as possible. One of the most important things I look for first is just any way to not get refresh stuck. Because one of the worst things ever is you having an amazing build, but there's a refresh in a really awful spot and you only have one refresh on the higher Crucibles, and just not being able to get it will completely end a run. So in terms of orbs, there's a couple of them that I really like. If I haven't solved my refresh situation and I see any of these, they're definitely insta-picks, right? Refresh circle, giving you refreshes, and when you draw, you'll just add refreshes to the board. A lot of these things have upgrades too, where if you actually just discard it, it'll instant refresh as well. Etherwheel is great, just no questions asked. Once you fire it, it refreshes the board after, does some damage, and then replenish orb, when fired, you know, refresh the board, and you're converting things into refreshes. You just want refreshes really bad. Obviously, there's a lot of relics that will help with refreshes as well. Tactical treat, just moving your refresh, hopefully makes you not get stuck. Guaranteeing a refresh every reload can be good. Just getting more refreshes from fresh bandana or peg bag. If you're feeling spicy, you could do leave the rest for later as a boss relic, though that gets a little crazy. There's obviously a lot of refresh builds that you could do, but the biggest thing is if you're trying to beat high Crucible, you just need a way to not get refresh stuck. The other thing you're absolutely going to want is some sort of AoE, especially going into the castle. If you have no AoE and you're tackling the castle on high Crucibles, you are probably going to have a bad time. There's a ton of orbs in the game that give AoE, right? And they range in how good they are. You have some basic things like Sphere, Baltazár starts with that, default Peglin, and Baltazár could have Bold Orb. You have Icicle, Cauldron Bubble, one of my favorite AoEs. Snowball, once it gets big enough, has AoE, really good for Act 4 as well. Poltergeist, Jupitorb, adding Transferency, go for the Icicle if you do the Assemble, if you can find the right piece. Instigatorb, my favorite is Ekorb because it just, you know, takes the damage of your previous orb and just makes it AoE. So there's a lot of really good orbs to get AoE. There's also a lot of relics to help you get AoE, right? You could just talk about bomb builds in general. Bombs are a very good source of AoE, especially if you get, you know, a lot of the relics and you get a whole bomb build going, or you have some bomb orbs. There's also just things like Refilibuster, right? Deal damage to all enemies equal to the number of pegs restored. You've got very consistent ways to do AoE, like Overwhammer, giving your projectile attacks overflow. Prime Rod of Frost, every prime number pierces an additional enemy. Things like Ring of Pain, this got buffed a while back and is insanely good. Whenever you lose health, deal 7 times that amount to all enemies. You could do Clear the Way to get Transferency. Pincher Maneuver is really fun. It's a cool way to split some of your damage to the front and back. You have things like crits, doing more piercing, and then there's a boss relic, Safety Pegulations, where if you're not doing a bomb build, you can do, you know, less bomb damage, but have a lot more piercing. So you just need AoE very badly. The other thing you're going to want in most Peglin builds is you're going to want a way to scale up in damage, a way to compete with some of the later enemies and bosses that scale up in their fights. And there's a lot of great ways to scale up in some way, right? You have a ton of different things to buff up the board itself, right? Upgrading the board in a lot of different ways. You could be trying to give yourself stats, right? With upping your crit damage or your non-crit damage. There's also a lot of unique ways to scale up via Bully Ball. I haven't gotten to utilize this a lot, but it goes stronger the more self-damage you do, or you could be trying to scale up in terms of debuffs that you're putting on the enemy, or you could scale up in terms of money, right? Highway Orbery could be upgraded an infinite amount of times, or Spintress Payment and Spinny Bank both do damage for the more gold that you're holding on to, and then there's Shock Absorber, just gets stronger the more bombs that you have. So just something to be thinking about. You want some way to scale up. There's also a lot of really good relics for scaling, things like Refresher Course, where if you have a bunch of refreshes, you'll be upping your stats, or Refresh Perspective, once again, buffing the board, Shrewd Scales when you're reloading, getting stats, every time you're critting, doing more and more debuffs, which could be things like Exploitable, so they take more crit damage, or once again, upgrading the board, or making poison go up instead of down. Just always have in the back of your mind, like, do you have a way to scale up against some of the enemies that scale very hard? Another super important thing is, do you have a way to sustain yourself or heal yourself? And so that could come in a lot of different forms, right? You could just be having a lot of Belusion to try to dodge attacks, or a lot of Bulwark to protect yourself, or obviously healing in so many different forms, right? Balm or Docked Orb, or even better yet, one of my favorite orbs in the whole game, Restorb, because it'll heal you and then eventually at level 3 give you max HP. And there's a lot of relics that could heal you. One of the best relics in the entire game, I would definitely put it in S tier, is Super Boots. You're healing out of, combat a lot. And healing out of combat is great, but what's even better is healing in combat. So if you have anything like Popping Corn or Cookie or Well Done Steak giving you consistent healing, that's always really nice. Obviously, max HP is even better as well. Things like Apple a Day or Wall Chicken for consistent health. Froggo Amulet, you're gaining max health whenever you add an orb to your deck. Grinding Monstera, my own relic, right? Arguably one of the best ones, right? Where you're getting, max HP when you kill people. If any amount of max HP that you have, if you get Salt Shaker, the shop relic, that can be even better. And something else I want to point out here is on very high crucibles, Round Guard is one of the best relics in the game for sustain, where it makes you immune to attack damage when reloading. And on one of the later crucibles, I think it's 15, when they get multiple attacks every time you reload, Round Guard is very good. And then obviously on top of that, you want some good, consistent single target damage. And so I just try to think of that little checklist, right? I'm always like, do I have a way to do all of the things that I just talked about? So I am personally okay with going for big decks. I know objectively, a lot of content creators will say, and it's probably true, that having a smaller deck in almost any roguelike deck builder is better. And sometimes I'll go for that if I have a very specific build, but I just love having my big bag of tricks to solve anything that I need solved. Especially if you can get the Ambidextrary Relic where you have one extra orb discard. Another thing I'd say is I like to play very aggressively, so try to take elite fights as much as you can. I would much rather die in Act 1 playing very aggressively and looking for power, because if you want to get a win, especially on the higher crucibles, you need to get a very strong build. And it's going to take a couple attempts sometimes, because although there is a lot of skill in Peglin, I would say it does have a tad more RNG than some of the other roguelike deck builders I've played, like Slay the Spire. Another thing is you have to get really good at aiming. The Peggle gameplay is a huge part of the skill. When you lose crits and refreshes higher on the wheel, you need to make sure in tight situations you can hit a clutch refresh or a crit. The Unicorn Horn Relic is a great way to practice, or you could just, go play the original Peggle, or just play Peglin a bunch. You'll get good. And one of the last pieces of general advice I would give is, like any roguelike, there's a lot of different builds and archetypes you can kind of try to lean into, right? There's bomb builds, there's refresh builds, crit builds, non-crit builds, duplication potion builds, slime builds, upgrading builds, money builds, Belusion or Bulwark builds, and a ton more. And I could show off all of the very specific combos and relics you need to make everything work, but that would take a lot of of time. So let me know if you want to see like a combo blueprint kind of video in the future. And now to transition into the next section, you really have to play to each character's strengths. So firstly, we have the default Peglin class, who is the first class you get when you play the game, and arguably the worst class for high crucibles, because your starting relic is battle rewards and chests contain an additional option to choose from, which is great, but all of the other classes have like more immediate bonuses, and the Peglin class has access to more orbs and relics than any of the other classes, so to me it kind of just mitigates that. So it feels like you actually don't get a bonus. So one general piece of advice I would have is to abuse some of the best pieces you have from other classes. So default Peglin has some orbs from other classes, right? Like the Potion Bolt and Summoning Circle from the Spinventor, or the Bold Orb from Balladin, or some poison stuff from Roundrel. So any really good orbs you definitely want to take. And Peglin does have some specific orbs for itself, right? You have Matryorbshka, you have Nosferatu, you have Docked Orbs. So any of those orbs that you don't normally see on other classes are going to be very, very strong to take. You do start with Dagorb as your starting orb, and I tend to ignore it. I don't upgrade it a lot. It's harder to do crit builds on high crucibles, but especially since you only have the one crit. But I will say it can be good in a pinch, especially if you do get a little bit of crit synergy. So potentially leaning into crit synergy can work. And there's not a lot of very specific advice besides all of this I would give for default Peglin. It's more just try to make the most of your Peglin tuition, right? Really try to focus in on certain builds, try to have your bag of tricks. If you're going to get offered a lot of things, maybe it'll be a bit easier to, get your refresh, get your AoE, get your kind of checklist completed. But otherwise, I don't have much advice besides just good luck, because I genuinely think the default Peglin is the hardest. Next, we have the Balladin, one of the easiest classes to beat in High Crucible, in my opinion. And that's mainly because of the starting relic Balladroid. At the start of battle, gain Bulwark equal to the number of orbs in your deck, or double your orb's largest base damage, whichever is higher. So this class, first of all, definitely promotes you to have a big deck potentially, which is great for me when I always talk about my big bag of tricks. On top of your big bag of tricks, if you have any of the orbs that scale up like we talked about earlier, then you're going to have a lot of Bulwark, because these orbs are going to be huge values and you'll end up with a lot of shield. And going along with all of that Bulwark, obviously a very good build you can do on Balladin is a Bulwark build. There are so many relics where you could retaliate damage on your Bulwark, or be gaining more max HP, or gaining Muscircle for the non-crit builds, because Roundrel and default Peglin like crit builds, Balladin tends to really like non-crit builds where you buff up your Muscircle, and there's a lot of going back and forth. Like whenever an effect causes you to gain Muscircle, gain Bulwark. Whenever you gain Bulwark, gain even more, right? When you lose Bulwark, gain balance. If you take self-damage, gain Bulwark. If shields are critted, gain Bulwark, right? There's also, every time you're refreshing, do non-crit builds. So I would say Balladin is the most straightforward, because there are just in general a lot of very consistent ways to synergize between the Bulwark and the, non-crit damage. There's a lot of other kind of builds that you can do. I've theoretically done crit builds on Balladin. Obviously not the best. If we're talking about the most consistent ways to try to win high crucibles, Bulwark builds with non-crit damage can be very good. And then obviously just focus on some orbs that can scale up like crazy, because that might allow you to trigger the, actual Balladroid gaining a bunch of Bulwark to begin with. And the last piece of advice I would give for Balladin is you can play a lot riskier on Balladin than you can a lot of other classes, right? The fact that just at the start of every single battle, you're going to be gaining some Bulwark, no questions asked, is very good. So, take even more elite fights than you normally would, right? Be a lot more aggressive, because you can, right? A lot of other classes struggle, especially on high crucibles, because you're constantly taking chip damage. You're constantly needing to potentially potentially pay for healing. You almost never need to pay for healing on Baladin, especially early on. So take that advantage, right? Be upgrading so often. Try not to heal and really try to be as aggressive as you can and upgrade as much as you can and buy as much as you can, because hopefully you shouldn't need to be healing. Up next is my favorite class, Roundrel. And we have Roundreloquence, so attacks apply a random debuff to the enemy. And I just am obsessed with debuff builds in any game, so I very much enjoy Roundrel. And I think Roundrel is pretty good. I think the status effects that you apply to enemies can not scale the greatest at crazy high crucibles, but there's definitely ways to make them scale good. So obviously you have your poison orbs, you've got your common, just hit someone with poison, targeting, hit someone with poison, cauldron bubble, one of my favorite AoE orbs on the entire game, putting poison on all of the enemies. Now obviously all of these do more damage if you can actually hit a crit, so you kind of are wanting to do a crit build on Roundrel for sure. You do have things that will up enemy debuffs, and double in Peglin 2.0 actually can be upgraded to double not only poison like it used to, but every negative status effect. So that makes blind, which is now called darkness, a lot stronger. That's potentially a build. And then there's obviously transferency. Glass half ball got buffed, so it now applies transferency to enemies when drawn, and that's really good because AoE is very good on Roundrel because everyone that you hit, right, is applying status effects. So if you can get more AoE, that's going to be very, very good. And there's so many incredible relics about status effects on Roundrel, right? You could get things like all of the stats you're putting on people give you Belusion, obviously a ton of really good poison relics like poison on bombs or on all your attacks, or when you apply any negative status effects, you're applying more, or enemies take double damage from Spinfection, or Spinfection goes up instead of down. Obviously, like I said, any AoE is going to be so OP on Roundrel more than any other class, right? Because you want to put as many status effects as you can. So get as much AoE as you can. Pincher is insanely good on Roundrel because you're just turning every attack into 2, right? Which then, say you're doing an AoE attack, you could have an AoE attack hit everybody, apply status effects, then you Pincher, so you then attack again, it hits everyone. So you could be doing so many more status effects than you can, right? There obviously is a boss relic where status effects are double intensity, but you do less non-crit damage, which hopefully you're going for crit. And then there are, I mean, Mask of Joy, very good. There's just so many fun status effects. And there's a lot of, in particular in Peglin 2.0, a lot of more support on Belusion. Most of the new relics actually had to do with Belusion and are on Roundrel. So making sure you can just never get attacked is very, 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 very good. Also, it just seems like Roundrel is the money class, and I've had the most successful money builds and investing builds on Roundrel. So things like Sprouting Spinvestment, where you're just building up your money. If you keep going to question marks, you can try to play very aggressively, right? And then Spinny Bank and Spintress Payment, doing more damage based on the gold. We have had some broken builds before, you know, where we beat the like Act 4 boss in Phase 1. You know, it's just insane. You can get some crazy stuff done with money builds on Roundrel. And then lastly, we have Spinventer, who is a really fun class and has Spinvent originality, unique orbs in your deck gain +1/+2. So obviously the biggest piece of advice I can have for Spinventer is to not take any duplicate orbs unless it's an orb that would be good duplicated. So some of the orbs that you might want to take multiple ofs is if you're doing an upgrading build, sometimes taking multiple upgrades could be the play. Now, if you can have a choice, just try to spread out. There's a lot of different orbs that, you know, apply upgrading. So if you can, try to keep a, you know, 1 copy of each, but it's not the worst. You know, if you find more Restorbs, you're only using those once anyway, so might as well try to get all the max HP. Or say you're doing bomb builds, multiple shock absorbers can be good, especially at level 3. They globally reduce the amount of damage you take from red bombs. Potion Ball, one of Spinventer's best orbs in my opinion, creating a bunch of slime and multi-ball, and can only be used once. So, and it can't do damage anyways, so if you have multiple, that's fine. And Summoning Circles, just firing your next orb. It's actually not doing any damage on its own, so the more Summoning Circles, the better. I love those Spinventer orbs. And speaking about slime, the game doesn't really talk about it a lot, but all of the slimes in the game, they actually actually get stronger if they are on upgraded pegs. So if you hit a healing slime and it has been upgraded to a certain degree, I don't know those calculations, right? It'll actually heal you more, right? Or things like, you know, the lightning slime, the chain reaction, it might get better the more it's upgraded. And it's really hard to explain how it exactly works because it's not very much explained, and I didn't really know until I talked with the devs myself. But that is just something to keep in mind on Spinventor, is if you're doing a slime build, which tend to be pretty good, especially if you can get some of the awesome relics like Slimy Salve or Prime Slime or a good slime, right? This is literally, if you slime something, it gets upgraded. So if you're doing an upgrade build or a slime build, it definitely makes sense to combine those two types of builds if you can. And going with all of those upgrading types of builds where you're trying to upgrade the pegs themselves, you know, things like refresh perspective, whenever you're refreshing a peg, they're just upgraded by one. It should be obvious, but if you're ever doing an upgrading build, like on Spinventor or anyone else, you also kind of want that to be a refresh build. Now, this is going back to the checklist. It's kind of why you always want, you know, a little bit of everything, but you definitely want an insane amount of refreshes if you're going to be upgrading the board, because if you upgrade the board, right, you need to then refresh it to actually use the new upgraded values. Or same thing with the slime. If you use up slime, you know, most of the slime that comes back, you need to refresh it to come back. So make sure you're putting extra attention into the refreshes. And then lastly, the assemble is a cool little gimmick if you can complete it. There's even an achievement for completing it, getting all 5 of the parts of the assemble. They combine together. It can be pretty fun. Hard to do, but it's a fun strat that can be good. And so now that we have all of the general advice and character advice out of the way, let's take a deep dive into every single difficulty increase on the Crucible wheel and how I would handle it. So a lot of the early levels are easy. We don't even need to talk about them too much, right? At Crucible 1, you start each run with an extra pebble, and pebbles lose value, right? In general, you're going to be trying to remove your pebbles as much as possible, so just remove them. Mini boss battles can appear in question mark scenarios. This is actually, like a lot of games, actually good because the rewards you get, like rare relics from elites, can be good. So you should be playing very aggressively anyways. So that's actually a good thing, right? Then pegboards containing 1 less crit. Now, this is why I always talk about how I don't do a lot of crit builds in my game. Now, if I get given, you know, relics or things that will do crit, then want to do it. It kind of depends on what class you're playing as, but losing a crit sucks. It just makes it where you probably want to do crit builds a little less consistently, but that just might be me, right? Missed navigation damage is increased to 4. Another reason why Super Boots is very good. Overall, not that bad, just furthering why you want sustain. Pegboards containing 1 less refresh. This is why then I talked about refresh. Getting refresh stuck is one of the worst things ever. You want to make sure you solve that. 6 enemies and mini bosses have increased health. I don't really have a way to specifically, you know, counter this besides you just got to get good, right? Having good AoE, having good single target damage. It's hard, but you can get through it. Post-battle healing reduced to 15% at Crucible 7. Once again, reason why you would want more sustain. 8, available gold is reduced in many circumstances. So this is when it's really important, if you can, to try to heal with money as little as possible. Now, if you're later in the game, a lot of times you might need to be healing a lot depending on your build. Obviously, speaks to getting a lot of sustain, right? So hopefully you're not wasting your money healing and you can actually use the money that you have because it is more valuable because it's harder to get on the upgrades that matter and on the, you know, the things that you want to buy. Something also to point out is if you're upgrading your orb, prices keep going up and up and up unless obviously you have that one shop relic. Collusion detection, right? Prices that scale up with each purchase remain fixed at their initial price. So if you have a lot of money, don't throw it away upgrading a lot each combat, right? Just upgrade 1 orb each combat. Now, say you're getting near the end of the game and you still have a lot of money and a lot of things to upgrade, maybe upgrade more, but you just got to be a lot more particular with how you spend your money. At 9, Red Bomb self-damage increased to 5. So this makes the caves in particular a lot scarier because unless you're grabbing the Red Bomb orb that spawns red bombs, which is a very fun orb, by the way, that just makes caves a lot scarier. And this makes max HP a lot important. It makes in combat healing, very important. So just some things to think about. It also makes it extra important if you're going to do a bomb build, and a red bomb build at that. It's going to make taking things like shock absorber even more important, because at level 3, right, it globally reduces red bomb damage. So if you're doing a red bomb build, kind of depends on what you're going for, right? But then at 10, bosses have increased health. This is a big one. This is a hard one. Once again, another reason to have good consistent damage. Just hard, no specific advice. Number 11 is start each run with a Terror Ball, which isn't too bad. There's some orbs that the interaction can actually be relatively decent, but it's just the tiny orb that is small. A lot of the times when I'm removing orbs, I'll try to remove Terror Ball first, besides the Pebble. There's technically an argument to be made if you're Spin Venter and you have the unique orbs. Maybe you keep Terror Ball. I still just remove Terror Ball first, but you know, more that you need to do. 12 is one that hurts a lot. 12 is lowering bomb damage, which it doesn't seem like that's a lot of bomb damage, but there's a lot of boards that are very specifically geared towards, like the slime mini boss in the first act, where it spawns all of the smaller slimes and there's 3 bombs on board, right? The slimes it spawns, I believe, have 150 health each. So anything below Crucible 12, if you can get the 3 bombs, you kill all of the minions, it's easy to kill the mini boss. But on Crucible 12 and above, as an example, in that combat, you're only going to now be doing 120 damage if you did it all perfectly, and the guy, you know, they have 150 health. So it just makes certain interactions very rough. Certain boards, it's very particular, but certain boards are twice as hard. So this is when AoE starts to matter a lot more, because you can't rely on bombs as much on the boards that desperately need AoE. So, you know, it always goes back to the checklist for me, but that's one of the reasons AoE is very important. The biggest thing is it just makes certain interactions really hard, so you want to focus on AoE. At 13, you only heal 50% of your max health when defeating a boss. Once again, just one of many wheels that is just solidifying you need sustain, you need max HP, especially with Act 4. We'll talk about that in a second. 14, start with 15% less max HP. Once again, one of the most important reasons for sustain. This is when you start to feel Baltazár being one of the best classes in the game for me, because, you know, all of the other classes, if you're taking chip damage, you're taking, even if it's only 2-3 damage per fight, having 85 HP instead of 100 makes that really rough. But Baltazár's constantly having starting bulwark, and, you know, that's very good. Crucible 15, enemies take an additional turn while you reload. So not only is this something to advocate for all of the sustain, but like I was talking about earlier, this is when the best relic you could probably ever get is the common relic Round Guard. You're immune to attack damage while reloading. If you are on a Crucible 15 or above, Round Guard becomes an S tier relic, because you do not want to take damage extra times when you're reloading. At Crucible 16 is start each run with a Horrible. Now this one, you really can't do anything. It's big, and it cannot be removed from your deck. That's about it. And so there's nothing really much to be said about that besides just deal with it. 17, mini bosses deal increased damage. It'd be good to have some sustain. Crucible 18, Haglin's shop has higher prices. So once again, this is something where it's very important to just hold on to the gold that you have. Shop relic that reduces prices would technically counter that, and that's really good. But this is kind of when, if you want a lot of golds, you need to start getting creative, right? Things like molten gold that give you extra gold, right? But then what if you have that and navigation inflation? So all the gold collected during navigation is worth 4 gold. So, you know, maybe you try to get the smallest amount of gold in the combat, and then that way you can get outrageous amounts of gold. And there's a lot of other combos in particular, right? Reduce, refuse, recycle, bombs detonated while navigating provide 5 gold. You can combo all of these together to be even more insane, right? Refreshes giving you more gold. And then obviously on the classes that have it, sprouting spinvestment could be a way to break the economy as well. So, Crucible 18 just makes you start thinking about that a lot more. Maybe you need to start paying attention to the gold mechanics if you're trying to have gold to utilize. 19, regular battles have a chance to contain additional enemies. This one is rough. So if you've ever been watching the videos or streams and you see random enemies with like purple health bars pop up, it's very hard. Now, I believe this got nerfed in some way in Peglin 2.0. I think it's limited to how OP it can make the enemies and like how many of them they can spawn. I don't know the details, but this did get a little bit easier, I believe, in Peglin 2.0. Just once again, huge shout out to AoE, especially the AoEs that don't just have piercing, but they hit anyone, like Cauldron Bubble or Poltergeist or Ekorb. All of the no questions asked hit everyone become even more valuable on Crucible 19. And then Crucible 20, bosses each become uniquely more difficult. Now, I don't remember all of the specifics and things like that, but, you know, as an example, you know, the mole in Act 1, right, gets like a target on the tree. And so it's like every other turn, you're not allowed to target. So every boss has a very specific, you know, kind of thing that they do. The wall eats the minions a lot faster and then, you know, just starts coming at you faster. The Act 4 final boss, we'll talk about here in a second, has like 1 million health instead of 600,000. So it's just, you know, there's some things to think about, but just in general, it's just the game's a lot harder, and all of the advice that I've given to you by now, you just need to really hone in and make it happen. And now for the cherry on top, the biggest part of the Peglin 2.0 update, Peglin Act 4. So Act 4 is the secret area you can unlock by getting a win with every class and then choosing both challenge relics, the first after Act 1 and then the second after Act 2. And most of the time, the challenge relics do make the game harder. Now, sometimes you can abuse certain ones to have an advantage, like the Mimic one, but it's really up to you if you want to beat Act 4 on your Crucible wins. I confirmed with the dev, and if you lose in Act 4, it still counts as a Crucible win. So don't ever feel like, you know, you don't want to go to Act 4 because you're scared of, you know, losing and then missing out on the Crucible. Now, there is something to be said about it. Maybe if you're only going for Crucible, maybe don't take the challenge relics. So kind of up to you what your goals are and what you're wanting to do. You know, for our current series, we're trying to beat every single Crucible Act 4, and that's really fun. So just depends on what you're going for. The two general pieces of advice I would give for Act 4 is, firstly, max HP becomes a lot more important, because if you haven't seen, there is a lot of things in Act 4 that will make you lose max HP. So any amount of max HP you can get, very good. Also, super boots becomes even more valuable because it can prevent you from hitting purple fires in Act 4, which will make you lose even more max HP. Restorb, obviously, shout out to that, giving you more max HP as well. And the other thing is just finding a way to scale up your damage is also very important. So just like we talked about earlier, you know, anything that scales, shock absorber, highway orbery, money, you know, stacking stats, snowball in particular is very, very good in Act 4 as well. But you just need a way, because you're going to be fighting a boss that has 600,000 health or 999,999 health on the highest Crucibles. So you just need to make sure you have sustain and you have a way to actually scale up to the absurd amount of health that you need to take down. Now, there is a guaranteed event you'll be getting in Act 4 that allows you to either gain 20 max HP or I think remove some orbs or get like a rare relic or something. I would almost always take the max HP unless you've already solved your max HP, because overall you're you know, if you have sustain in even any form, you know, that'll protect you pretty well, but it's the loss of max HP that can end runs. And that's pretty much it. I'm sure that there is so much more that I forgot to even mention, and everyone else probably has some other great tips or play styles. So let us know in the comments down below if you have any more advice and you want everybody else to know. I bet there's going to be some good nuggets of information I didn't even mention. So definitely look in the description down below. And if you want to see even more high-level gameplay. We have an entire series with over 400 episodes, and we've gone through all of the Cruciballs over and over and over. And currently, like I said, we are going through Act 4 on every single Crucible in this Peglin 2.0, and that is a lot of fun. So definitely check those out. Catch us in a stream as well. I try to answer questions when I'm not throwing my runs in the most stupid of ways. And let me know if you like these more edited types of videos and guides and tier lists and things. I'm trying to do more fun stuff like this on top of playing all of the games, so I appreciate your feedback. I really want to do an orb and relic tier list soon once we finally see all of the new content in Peglin 2.0. And make sure you subscribe and ring that bell like all the big boy YouTubers say to be notified when more Peglin content comes out. If there are some, they'll be on the screen right next to me along with all the other fun stuff we do. And if you're going to be grinding out these Peglin Cruciballs, I hope this helped. I wish you luck, and I'll see you all next time.